Greetings, and welcome to today's segment of Frontpage, where every weekday I summarize and find the most interesting parts of the day's headlines from 5 different newspapers from around the world. My quest is to weed out the facts as they're reported in each newspaper, and I'll do my very best to find the most interesting stories out there. I'm your host, Murat Hamami. Let's get started here at home in Turkey with the Daily Sabah. And the headline reads, government pitches new economic model, signals new steps to shore up the lira. This is, of course, a top story in Turkey. Treasury Finance Minister Nurettin Nebati outlined Turkey's new economic path to investors in London, pledging to keep the exchange rate stable, bringing inflation down to single digits, and keep dollarization at bay. Speaking to investors and bankers in a series of meetings in his first trip abroad, Nebati also said Ankara would announce a new scheme on the weekend to get households to convert holdings of gold into Turkish lira. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been endorsing a model based on lower borrowing costs, which he says will boost production, employment and exports, and also eventually help Turkey solve its chronic current account deficit problem and contribute to stabilizing the Turkish lira to support the drive. Turkey's central bank has slashed its interest rates by 500 basis points since September to 14% before pausing the easing cycle last month. Now, put together a little package. Take a look at this.
Türkiye ekonomi modelini ifade ettik. Özellikle kur korumalı mevduat hesabıyla ilgili bir başarı hikayesinin yazıldığını onlar da farkına vardılar.
Turkey's Treasury and Finance Minister met nearly 100 high-level executives in London during a 2-day visit. Nurettin Nebati held talks with 18 asset management companies, 19 international development and investment banks, and over 10 private equity, infrastructure, venture capital fund and technology firms Monday and Tuesday. He provided information on Turkey's economic outlook and on Turkey's new economy model. During the talks, Nebati underlined Turkey's dynamic production capacity, strong growth performance, healthy public finance, firm banking sector and low debt. In addition, stability in foreign exchange rates and transitory inflation were emphasised in the meetings. British economist Timothy Ash praised Minister Nebati's London contacts in a Twitter post.
Nebati did a decent job in London. He came well prepped and is good at marketing, selling the Turkey story. Was open, welcoming to foreign capital, was clear capital controls are off the agenda. I still worry about our policy with Russia-Ukraine risk looming.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been endorsing a model based on lower borrowing costs, which he says will boost production, employment and exports, and also eventually help Turkey to solve the chronic current account deficit problem and contribute to stabilising the Turkish lira. To support the drive, Turkey's central bank has slashed its interest rates by 500 basis points since September to 14%, before pausing the easing cycle last month. The lira rebounded after Erdogan's announcement of a scheme to boost lira deposits by protecting them against depreciation. The scheme aims to encourage foreign currency holders to convert their funds to lira and keep their savings in Turkish money, compensating depositors for any losses due to lira depreciation. The facility has attracted more than 321 billion Turkish lira so far.
Right, you're back here again with me, back in the studio. OK, let's move on to our next newspaper. We do have a lot to get through. Let's take a look at the UK. Let's take a look at The Guardian. What are they doing there? The headline reads, COVID rules to be abolished in England in a fortnight, in a couple of weeks' time. For those who don't know what a fortnight is. OK, so as the threat of the Omicron wave has receded in England, the government has been quick to move the conversation on to living with COVID. It was inevitable that this would mean the eventual lifting of legal restrictions, including the need to self-isolate. But even given the optimistic tone in recent weeks, Boris Johnson's announcement on Wednesday came sooner than expected. While he signalled the scrapping of restrictions in England by the 24th of February, a month earlier than had originally been planned, he provided no detail. It is unclear whether any specific scientific advice has provided to impact of the move. None has been published, and some of the latest evidence published by the government stage advisors give an idea of a potential risk. Now, an assessment in mid-January concluded that lifting of Plan B measures could result in a return to epidemic growth, particularly if precautionary behavior, including testing, decreases as a result of reduced perception of risk. Since then, case numbers have remained high, and on Wednesday, figures from the Office for National Statistics showed that in England, infection levels rose to 1 in 19 people in the first week of February. Okay, that's what's going on in the UK. They're releasing and they're easing the tension. Let's move on to our next newspaper. Let's take a look at Japan. The Japan Times have gone with an interesting thing. Why wages aren't rising. We know that around the world, people's salaries are going up, but why not in Japan? A mystery is swirling around the world's third largest economy. Why haven't wages increased in Japan over the last 2 decades as they have elsewhere? Since Prime Minister Fumio Kishida took office, he has made it clear that raising wages is one of the top priorities for his economic agenda and a crucial component of his new capitalism. But there are no simple solutions. Now, joining me to talk more about this headline is political commentator Seijiro Takashita. He is, of course, in Tokyo, Japan, and he will hopefully help us understand. Seijiro, always a pleasure to see you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us here on Frontpage.
You're having...
Now, this is an interesting headline that's run in the Japan Times. Why is it run? And can you tell us about it, please?
Well, actually, the biggest reason is excessive conservatism of the Japanese corporations. I mean, they came up with double-digit record profit before this COVID-19 for a couple of years, and still their actual increase of pay to their employee was less than 3%, which is laughably low. And this is a disappointment for the Prime Minister Abe, who basically displayed a weakening of the yen, which induced a lot of profit for the Japanese leading exporters. And he expected, I assume, that would lead to increase of income of the individuals, which would obviously contribute to the GDP of the biggest component, which is private consumption. But that didn't happen. Partly because of this excessively conservative mind of the Japanese corporations who've gone through the nightmare of having to pay back their debt after the bubble popped early in the 1990s.
Okay. So are we likely to see the new government moving in with a different plan?
Oh, it's actually very similar to, Mr. Abe's plan, which is basically, asking the corporations, please, can you, increase the pay of the individual, employees? They can't really force anything, obviously, but the point here is that I think they really need to stress the overall circulation of the economy, which many of the Japanese companies are doing. I mean, they have so much, for example, cash in their hands, and, they're not using for capital expenditure. And what's happening is you have these, vultures, in my opinion, like the American activist who's asking the Japanese corporations to pay up, their dividend payouts, for example, and just paying off their internal monetization. So, it's almost cynical to see what's really happening here. But again, it's very difficult for the Japanese to really ask for a rise, because the most important thing for the Japanese, because of the still the legacy of lifelong employment system, and because of difficulties of changing jobs in Japan, people don't ask for raise, they ask for security of jobs. And at least that's exactly what the Japanese corporations are continuously doing.
Interesting. Last question, very quickly. Has the cost of living gone up in Japan in the last decade?
Not in the last decade. It's basically stayed really flat. And that's one of the dangers, because people literally forgot the word inflation. And that's what we're seeing all around the world, isn't it? So I think what we really need to see is a lot more acuteness towards the final changes that we're finally seeing after all these years.
Indeed. Sergio, pleasure was all ours. Thank you so much for joining me here on Front Page. Always a pleasure to see you, sir. Thank you very much. Take care. There you go. Sergio there in Tokyo explaining to us how Japan has virtually zero inflation and at the same time no one's getting paid more money. Okay, let's move on to China. We're in the same area, China. Well, I'm not going to talk about the Olympics. I'm going to talk about the Quad meeting. Quad foreign ministers meet amid divergent expectation. Now, remember, this is a newspaper in China, so they're going to be taking probably the opposite stance to many Western countries. The newspaper talks about the tone of the fourth Quad foreign ministers meeting scheduled for Friday, that's tomorrow, in Australia, is still based on ideological differences and a Cold War mentality, as US and Australia officials stressed the meeting will discuss the challenges posed by China and Russia to do so-called democracy and rules-based orders. The Chinese foreign minister on Wednesday said that the US image of democracy has already collapsed, and using democratic values to form cliques for confrontation is a betrayal of democracy. Zhao Lijian, a spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, remarks came after U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs Daniel J. Crittenbrink and Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne made remarks to the media that the upcoming Quad meeting will discuss the challenges that China and Russia pose to them. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is expected to travel to Australia this week to meet counterparts from Japan, India, and Australia to discuss Indo-Pacific coordination. The two-day meeting of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad as it's shown, foreign ministers come amid the Biden administration concerns about China, even as tensions with Russia over Ukraine ratchet up in Europe. Okay, let's move on now to our final newspaper today. Quickly, we're going to look at the Financial Times. Got some interesting news here. I'm sure you've all heard about it. Power to boil 60 kettle marks huge advance in nuclear fusion technology. This is the running newspaper. Okay, so the European scientists have set a new record for the most energy to be generated from nuclear fusion, the latest breakthrough in decades-long efforts to produce power by harnessing the reaction that powers the sun. A team of researchers from the Eurofusion Consortium produced 59 megajoules from a sustained reaction lasting 5 seconds, enough power to boil about 60 kettles, in an experiment at the Joint European Torus facility in Oxford, England. Now, JET, a collaboration between EU member states, Switzerland, UK, and Ukraine, founded in 1978, is the world's largest, most powerful operation tokamak machine. This was designed and pioneered by the Soviet scientists in the 1950s. It uses powerful magnets to hold a plasma of 2 hydrogen isotopes, deuterium and tritium, in place as it is heated to temperatures hotter than the sun, so that the atomic nuclear fuse releasing energy. Now, in half a century of experiments around the world, scientists have been unable to generate more energy from a fusion reaction than the power-intensive system consumes. Unlike nuclear fusion, when atoms are split, fusions do not produce significant radioactivity waste. But the biggest challenge to make fusion commercial is how to sustain the reaction and prevent it from extinguishing. Fusion energy has plenty of skeptics giving how long it has taken to make progress, but its promise as a tool to fight climate change has increased interest over the past decade. Fusion power would emit no greenhouse gases, and supplies of the chemical inputs are essential exhaustible. There are approximately 50 deuteriums in every bathtub of seawater. And while tritium is less accessible, it can be extracted from the commonly occurring metal lithium or generated in a reaction itself. A small glass of fuel could theoretically power a house for hundreds of years. There you go. The future is really here, and fusion energy is very exciting, especially when we're faced with climate change. Okay, that wraps up the top headlines of the day from around the world. We've taken a look from Turkey to China, Japan, and in general, the Financial Times. Tomorrow, be sure to tune in, be sure to tune in tomorrow at the same time. Well, I'll be here to give you a synopsis of the front pages from around the world. I'm your host, Murad Hamami.